Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been working with RICS for nearly 13 years now. I currently sit within our thought leadership and analytics part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 qualified members working worldwide, right across that property life cycle, from land, planning and development, construction, valuation, brokerage, finance, building operation, building surveying. It's obviously a very, very wide canvas upon which data and tech is having a profound effect. And indeed, our members also work across all the major asset types, whether that's land itself, commercial, residential, alternative assets, and indeed infrastructure. So once again, a huge impact of how data and tech can help the market work better. And I'm really pleased today to have Dolapo joining me today from Estate Intel. So welcome to the call, Dolapo.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
Pleasure, pleasure. And before we get into the bits and bytes and the kind of tech side of things, it's always nice to have the kind of human element. So it'd be great to hear a bit about your backstory.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, like I said, thank you for having me. I have a background in investment and finance in property. So I am an alumnus of the University of Reading. I studied investment and finance in property just about 10 years ago. It was a fantastic course that brought me onto the trajectory of, I guess, of a career within the property industry. Originally, or the first 2 years, it was general focus on broad real estate, but in the final year, we honed in on more investment and finance topics. And it was in those topics that I actually took an interest in real estate research specifically. And sort of built on that eventually. I'm from Nigeria, so lots of the work I do, of course, is Nigeria related. But that's my background.
And what's the origin story of Estate Intel itself? How did that come about?
Wow. So good that I've already brought the university side to it, because I mean, if I dig a little deeper, I think in my final year of uni, what I had, having done some of those very interesting research analytical projects that we had to do for the investment and finance course, I ended up thinking I would love to be, like, my dream job would be to be the head of research in a real estate firm, in like a CBRE or a JLL or Strand Parker, Savills, etc. So I had a real strong passion for research, and I think that grew with me as I eventually came back to Nigeria right after university. So when I finished and I came back, what was very interesting to see is that a lot of the tools I had access to in the UK, SNL, which is now owned by S&P at the moment, IPD, RCA, CoStar, a bunch of the stuff that we had access to as students to do our projects and to do everything. And when I got back to Nigeria and I was seeing lots of construction, real estate activity, I started looking for similar platforms just so I could know, oh, who's developing this or what's going on? Tell me everything I need to know. But I never found anything. So what I eventually started doing when I realized there was nothing out there was just pretty much blogging, right? I just see some information, verify in some simple way, and I'll just put it up on a blog. It was simply just WordPress that I started off with, and that's how things sort of snowballed to where we are today. A bunch of, along the way, consultants, people from like Big Four, people working on feasibility studies for PE companies would reach out saying, "Oh my gosh, you've organized all this information I've been looking for. Thank you." So from there, it sort of built on, but that's the baseline origin of how it all started.
And given where you are now, I mean, what sort of services, solutions, what kind of clients are you working with? Because obviously it's a very, very broad area, real estate. So I presume there's lots of different ways that you're helping the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a wide range of clients that we work with. The people that are probably our biggest customer base, developers and property investors. So people who are looking to invest in the property sector, and usually institutional scale investments, so shopping centers, hotels, office buildings, large scale residential projects, and they just need data research from an objective party to either get like investment committee, to get their approvals, to get debt, or just to validate that it makes sense to do a certain project at a certain time. We do work with many other smaller segments. So construction consultants use Estate Intel a lot to track what's under construction so that they can do a little more effective business development. But I would say that our biggest customers are property developers and investors, sometimes financiers as well.
And in terms of that evolution of services, I mean, you mentioned that you literally started blogging, doing effectively kind of research from that perspective. How, from a technical perspective, has your solution evolved?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I started blogging while I was still working full time, right? So I was working in, at the time, what was CBRE's local partner in Africa. I led the research team in that company. The company is called Brawl. Then I went on to work in the alternative investments desk at AXA in Nigeria as well. But all that time I was blogging and just organizing that information. When I did decide to do this full time, we built up an application. So we allowed people come and access that data through the platform, through an online platform, a web application, and they could subscribe to get the data. The team has also evolved, so a lot more process has gone into the data collection. We've expanded our reach through partners and other data collection methods. So a lot in terms of the system, which before in the past was just me on my computer, maybe making a couple phone calls, sending emails, and doing some online research, has definitely evolved to a much bigger structure. And one of the interesting things is that I guess in the back end of Estate Intel, there are two applications. So there's the user-facing application, the platform, but we also have an internal research team application where we put in the data, that analyzes it for us, makes all the data collection and data analysis process really, really seamless. So yeah, of course, the process has changed quite a bit. I'm very proud of that.
And I guess, I mean, you earlier on in the discussion kind of contrasted the reality of sitting at a desk in the UK with CoStar and MSCI IPD data and all these other data sources. I mean, is that essentially the problem that you're trying to solve? The fact that there simply isn't that kind of maturity and availability of data around different parts of the property life cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think within Africa, it would be maybe 10 years ago, you could say, yeah, look, there's no data. But even then, I think the problem was always not the lack of data, but the lack of organized information in central sources. So there is a lot of information, but it's in silos. A lot of it is also inaccurate. There are lots of duplicates. It's a bit of a mess, but there is information. I think the real value add is making sure we can organize it and make it centrally accessible for anybody who does want to access it. I do think that the markets within Africa are very different to Western markets like the US, Asia, etc., where the UK and the US, especially in terms of volume, like investment volume. And I'm pretty sure what happens in 6 months in New York in terms of investment volume is much more than has happened in Africa over the past 5 years. So it's a much slower market. So it also means that the needs of the participants within it, they're not going to be the same. So it can't be the exact same product that will be used on the continent. It's not a cut and paste. It definitely isn't. But I mean, yeah, in terms of the problem that we're solving, it's just faster access to really basic information that anybody should have access to. And it goes back to the original problem where I just came back and I was like, okay, who's the developer of this project, or what's the market size? I mean, these were the questions I had to do to answer for projects in school. So and I had a bunch of tools. So when I came back and I was like, okay, what's happening here? And I couldn't do that. It just seemed, why not? Like why shouldn't we be able to answer these questions? So that's sort of where we are. And I mean, I definitely think we are still evolving and learning from the market to make sure that the solution that we are putting out is adapted and relevant for the continent, so to speak. Yeah, that's where we see the issue and the problem. Anyway.
And I suppose to sort of summarize how your clients are working with the data, how do they put the data to use? What are they actually using the data for? Because data in itself, unless you turn it into information and action and decisions, is of little value. So how are they actually using the data?
So interesting. Maybe I'll pick my words a bit more carefully now. But more of the subscription customers, they are the ones that access data, probably raw information, spreadsheets, There is some analyzed information, the growth rates, the overall trends that you can access as a subscriber. So usually those teams are research teams. So companies with research team, property development company with a research team, or a lender that has a research team, or a project team that can do research. They take that information and they either make presentations for their clients and use it to guide an approval or a non-approval decision. But on the other hand, where it comes to our bigger clients, which are the developers and the investors, they are usually a bit smaller companies with, where we deal with leadership, C-level executives, and those guys are not going to sit on a computer and download spreadsheets and click about. They want a report, a presentation that is pretty much like, okay, tell me what to do. So the product for them is usually reports, which are relatively easy to do. It's not like it's a whole system. Sometimes they do take long, but we have thankfully a product suite that we can just pull information from, ready-made information on average rents in a certain location, average sale prices, yields, market size. It's all there. So it's really just picking what's relevant and putting it together to give them the insights that they require. So yeah, they use it. They either take it to the board, get the approval. One of the interesting ones we're working on now is somebody who just wants to understand, okay, what is the gap for retail, hospitality, and commercial offices in a second-tier Nigerian city. So we are essentially collecting all the data we have in that and just going to put it together and give them that in a more insightful format. So sometimes the output isn't just data; it's actually insights and knowledge, actionable knowledge. So that's how they're using it, and that's how we're giving it to them.
I understand. And interesting that you made a very valid point earlier that this isn't simply about cutting and pasting market dynamics from somewhere like New York or London or Frankfurt into these African economies. But I guess the interesting question I've got is that for the different countries across Africa, what does the landscape look like in terms of data and data solutions? Because there's always a danger that from our perspective, we think of Africa as a single homogeneous economy, when clearly it's not. And obviously you're operating in different markets, both within Nigeria and other African countries. What's the landscape look like? Is it very different from country to region to region?
I mean, I think it's similar, but it's not the same. The first thing I'll probably do is take out South Africa from the dynamic, because South Africa is a little more advanced. They actually have some of the global data players in real estate. Well, in global data like MSCI and S&P, each of which own or have a real estate data business, Moody's as well. So that is in South Africa, and the market, of course, is a lot more liquid. So that activity is there. When it comes to the rest of the continent, I think the way we see Africa, one, is in terms of cities, because real estate is really more about the entire country. And when we look at the continent as well, where are the active cities? What countries are they in? There are about 54 countries in Africa, and about 70%, 11 to 15 countries account for almost 70% of the continent's GDP, 50% of the continent's population. So where we typically focus is in those top cities. So that's Lagos in Nigeria, Accra in Ghana, Nairobi in Kenya, Cairo in Egypt, Casablanca, some of the South African cities, of course. We also have the likes of Lusaka, Maputo, etc., spread out at Dar es Salaam, spread out across the continent. And in terms of the data requirements or the data dynamic or the landscape in each of those countries, I would say they're more or less the same. Some better than others. I think in Nairobi, there is some regulation around what information has to be shared. So sometimes some say valuations might be slightly easier in Nairobi than they are in Nigeria, but the baseline problem is still the same. And we saw that even in some of the more advanced countries that we didn't expect to, like Egypt and Morocco, even though they are in Africa, they're more typically grouped with the Middle East. So, and the Middle East itself is a slightly more advanced in terms of transparency, but you find that the problem is there, maybe not to the same degree, but it's just not as transparent as you'd expect. So yeah, that's how we'd see the market changes or the different dynamics in each of those markets.
I understand. And as your solution has obviously evolved over time, and as you say, it's a lot now about structured data and analytics in that way. How have you seen that kind of joining together with the way that your clients are beginning to build more of a kind of an enterprise strategy for the way they deal with data? Because presumably they're on a similar journey of beginning to understand how important data is, and once it's available and can be accessed, they clearly want to leverage that data for more and more opportunities. How are you sort of fitting in with their ambitions to become more sort of data led?
I mean, I think we're still going to be a third party to a bunch of these companies that we're working with, but we have seen ourselves, or we've seen Estate Intel slip into a strategy slot or a planning slot into many of these companies on an annual basis. For example, there's a facility management company that every year, even the points that we decided we wanted to slow down on the subscriptions, they have had it in their business that this is something that we're going to continue doing. And it has changed the way their teams do business development. In some other companies, even if it's not on a structured basis, we find that, or they find a way to bring us into most of the decision making that they do. It might not be every year, maybe every 15 months, every 9 months after that, but when it's time to make a decision, they slot us in. And then, I mean, on a more standard basis, when it's time to do strategy planning, we provide that launch pad at the beginning of the year to understand, okay, whether it's through a workshop or through the data, and they create a workshop through the information that they're able to access from our platform. Then we can see how over the course of the year we can still continue to work with them to help them achieve their goals. So I mean, like I said, we'll still see we're still a third party, so most of these companies, I guess slowly their processes are changing to rely on the information that we provide when it's time to make a decision.
Interesting. A question I often ask our tech partners when we have this kind of discussions, because it's usually a kind of rich vein of insight, is so often when you engage with clients, as you do on a long-term basis, you begin to get insights that perhaps change the way you thought about what your business can do, the kind of solutions you provide. I mean, what are the things that stand out for you about having worked now with your sector for so long, about how they're using data in a way you didn't perhaps expect, or needs and wants they had that you perhaps didn't initially think about?
I mean, that's a good one, and I could probably look at it in two ways. The first would be, I think maybe the first one that we learned is that what we set out to build is a data platform for institutional investors and market participants who want to understand the market. But when we started, a lot of the people that actually ended up using the platform and asking us a bunch of questions were construction consultants who just wanted to know what was under construction. No problem with that, but I guess it's also trying to figure out what type of product we want to build, and how scalable whichever segment is that we want to play in. So navigating that was particularly interesting. But I think one of the more recent realizations is that for data platforms, and I think this could cut across board for anybody that you're speaking with, for data platforms to thrive, you need the user base there has to be a rich research team user base, if that makes sense. So a lot of, like I said, a bunch of the customers that we serve, even though they're smaller quantity but much higher value in terms of paying capacity, we find that their executives, their C-levels, and I mentioned that earlier. So not all the time. Sometimes they might just say, hey, I need a spreadsheet. Can I download this from your platform? We need a list of all the transactions over $5 million over the past 4 years. We got a request like that just yesterday. So those still happen, and they can do that all on the platform. But most of the time, they just want to understand the position or the market dynamics around a particular opportunity, and that's a reflection of the market, because the market volume-wise, it's still relatively slow. And then, volume-wise, it's still relatively slow. So it means that the type of information that they're going to require on an ongoing basis is not as much. And the second thing is that because they're a little more senior executives that are trying to do these types of deals, are asking these types of questions, they want something closer to a finished product. But I mean, as the market evolves, these companies will get bigger. There will be many more companies, and those companies will start to have their own research teams. But it's only until then those research teams are available that you start to see more people rather, consuming data, just raw data. Till then,
Yeah.
what the desire is for a close to finished product.
I mean, have you seen any sort of particularly exciting use cases that have almost surprised you in terms of how the people are using the data?
I mean, the most interesting one, it wasn't really a surprise. I guess it was just something that kept hovering that we had to pay. Was what I mentioned, the construction consultant use case. But I mean, one of the more interesting ones that we've been exploring recently is the execution side. So people ask, okay, we want to develop this. What's the market like? They use the information, use the insights, and they are able to see what they need to do, right? And they say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. What next? So sometimes the requirements are now increasingly going beyond the data and asking questions about the execution. So we are over the past 6 months, we have been using our information and our data, our insights to help our clients execute. So not just doing the research. It's like, okay, this type of project, you want to do a grade B office in this secondary location. Our data says that 1, 2, 3 are the best construction consultants to work with. And we pair these guys together, and yeah, that makes their job a bit easier if they haven't done that before. So yeah, that's one of the interesting ways that I guess we're starting to see the product evolve, and sort of the more interesting ways that we can also use our data to generate more revenue.
And I guess in parallel to kind of your evolution in terms of the services you're providing, the data you're working with, how have you seen the market change since you started? What's been their journey in parallel with yours?
Look, the market has improved significantly. I mean, I sit back and think 2013 in terms of what I could Google and what would come out in terms of just it's as easy as like, okay, what property is this? Who's the developer? When is it going to be completed? Who's the architect? What are the average rents? And things, I mean, back then, okay, I mean, I wouldn't say it was completely empty, but it was just one or two people that had places where you could find this information. And even then, it wasn't particularly easy to find. It took months and months to come across and discover these things. So I mean, now that has changed. A lot more service providers, as it happens everywhere else around the world anyway, are paying more attention to research as a marketing tool to help them win other business. So it just means that there's more information available, which is fantastic for everybody. So definitely the market has improved in terms of, in terms of transparency, in terms of transparency, full stop. So that's definitely a strong upside. A lot more people are asking questions, and of course, in the past 10 years, there have been a couple of recessions in Nigeria and in many other African countries as well. So people want to make sure that they are making the right decision, that they are at least doing some due diligence before making significant investments. So yeah, it has changed, and yeah, it wasn't always like that. So it's good to see that. I mean, things can only get better.
And on that sort of phrase of things can only get better, how do you see the industry developing, and what direction will it take? I mean, it's interesting that you talked about it's almost a story like many other markets of cities rather than countries in that way, in terms of people looking at those opportunities. But where do you see the sector going in terms of its maturity, in terms of investment flows? What's your 5-year prediction?
Oh, I love it. This is putting me on the spot. Look, I mean, let me not say past decade, the hotspots for investment have been Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, Maputo to some degree, which is in Mozambique. And a lot of the sector focus has been office and retail, to some degree, maybe hospitality. But office and retail have really, really taken the mantle. But what has happened in the past few years in those countries specifically, they've all gone through significant recessions. So Ghana is going through a whole debt crisis. Nigeria has been in economic I won't say it's been an economic crisis with a currency devaluation free fall that has been happening for the past few years consistently over the past few years. In Nairobi, there is some supply glut in the office sector and some other sectors as well. So what we are now seeing investors do is pivot to other cities other more interesting cities where there is potentially a bit more currency stability, and also across the board, even in the cities I've mentioned, diversifying the sectors that they're investing in. So investors that are still participating in the likes of Lagos or Accra are increasingly looking at other sectors like data centers, student housing, to some degree industrial, where investment opportunity hasn't been really tapped significantly, and now are also looking at other markets within French West Africa or Francophone Africa, let me say that. So predominantly in the likes of Senegal, even though they're having a bit of a crisis now, politically speaking, but Senegal is definitely one of interest, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Morocco as well. Cairo was also potentially becoming a darling, but they're also having similar issues to Nigeria with regard to currency, difficulty in taking money out, which is obviously going to be very important for institutional investors. But those countries, like I said, so those cities, Casablanca, Dakar in Senegal, Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, we are paying attention to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, because they're just coming out of something now, and there is potentially a lot of interest that could happen within West Africa in East Africa rather, within Dar. So yeah, I mean, that's how from sector dynamic it's shifted from the traditional sectors to what you call the alternative sectors, and then the cities where they have moved from the traditional flagship cities like Lagos, like Accra and Nairobi to the other sectors or the other cities where there's potential with more stability.
Indeed. No, I mean, it's fascinating that in many respects that this mirrors a lot of behavior you see in other, economies in Europe, where, that move to alternatives and that focus on perhaps what you might call second tier cities where there's still opportunities in that way. I mean, from your perspective, as a final thought, what are you working on? What's the next step in your journey for your business?
No, it's two things. One that I mentioned already, just making sure that we can support our clients through the life cycle of their decision making, not just from the conceptual side and the decision, but also to the execution. And we do have quite a lot of data and information that could help them execute their investments a lot better. I think making sure that we are using the data, not just selling it and say, hey, just take the information and figure out what to do, because the market is still relatively slow in terms of transaction volumes. If we just sell data and move on, it really doesn't make sense. So selling the data or working with the customer, helping them use the data and helping them figure out how they can execute with the information is important for business longevity. One of the other things that we are also exploring at the moment on a lab project basis, testing and playing, is something called Vespa, which I think I have shared with you in the past. But essentially, you can think of it like a Zoopla or like a Zillow, where you put in the price estimate. So what we've done is you can put in a neighborhood in African cities, say, okay, how many bedrooms, what type of property is it, and we'll be able to tell you a price. So just providing a bit more property price transparency, similar to how you can put in a postcode in the UK and you get £300,000, and this is what the price was 2 years ago, etc. We're doing something similar and just playing with that, and potentially just helping the regular consumer, not just the businesses, with their real estate investments, just helping regular people understand what they can do and how the property market works. Those are the two major things that we're looking at moving forward.
Perfect. Well, it's been fascinating to talk, and fascinating as ever to get an insight on market behavior around the world and how data is becoming really just an essential part of the property industry in this way. But for today, Dolapo, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure as well.